The high-velocity whistle of a 17-pounder shell is a sound that strips away the ego of even the most decorated panzer commander. In the Bocage of Normandy, that sound was the constant, jagged soundtrack to a slow-motion industrial execution. We often look at the maps of June 1944 and see the sweeping blue and red arrows of Operation Overlord, imagining a clash of tactical brilliance versus rigid defense. But history, when felt through the vibration of a Tiger tank's floorboards, tells a story not of grand maneuvers but of a catastrophic systemic failure. The German front in France didn't just break under the weight of Allied courage. It dissolved because it had become a logistical ghost, a hollowed-out machine trying to fight a 20th century war with 19th century veins. Consider the horse. It is the great unwashed secret of the Wehrmacht. While the propaganda reels showed the sleek, predatory silhouettes of Panther tanks prowling through French villages, the reality of the 7th Army was the smell of wet manure and the rhythmic clip-clop of nearly 300,000 horses. These animals were the primary prime movers for the infantry divisions holding the Atlantic Wall. When the Allied air forces unleashed the transportation plan, they didn't just bomb bridges, they paralyzed a biological supply chain. A horse needs fodder, and a horse cannot outrun a P-47 Thunderbolt. By mid-June, the French countryside was littered with the bloated carcasses of pack animals, their wagons overturned, spilling crates of ammunition that would never reach the front. The German infantryman, the Lanzer, found himself anchored to the earth, unable to retreat and unable to maneuver, while his motorized opponents moved with the fluidity of Mercury. The mechanical reality of the panzer divisions was equally deceptive. A Tiger II is a marvel of engineering on a factory floor, but in the sunken lanes of Normandy, it was a 68-ton liability. The torsion bar suspension was a nightmare of complexity. If an inner road wheel failed, a mechanic had to spend 8 hours in the mud under fire, removing the outer layers just to reach the problem. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that settles into a maintenance sergeant's bones when he knows that the spare transmission he needs is currently sitting in a rail yard in Magdeburg, 300 miles away, under a pile of rubble. The Germans fought with exquisite instruments that were too fragile for the grit of a war of attrition. By contrast, the American Sherman was a vulgar, mass-produced box, but it was a box that worked, and more importantly, it was a box that could be fixed in an hour by a kid from Iowa with a wrench and a cigarette. Then there was the sky. The air over France in the summer of 1944 didn't belong to the Luftwaffe. It was a ceiling of jagged steel. To be a German driver was to live in a state of permanent, low-grade terror. You moved at night, without lights, peering through the gloom of the Joker season. The Jabos Jagdbomber were the Allied fighter bombers that turned every road into a gauntlet. The German front collapsed because the interdiction was absolute. Rommel, a man who understood the kinetic nature of desert warfare better than anyone, found himself trapped in a static nightmare. He couldn't move his reserves because any division that stepped onto a paved road during daylight hours was simply erased from the order of battle. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, took 17 days to travel from southern France to Normandy. In 1940, they could have crossed that distance in 3. The friction of the Allied air umbrella acted like a thick, invisible syrup, slowing every German reaction until it was no longer a reaction at all, but an autopsy. Logistics is often treated as the boring cousin of strategy, but in France it was the protagonist. The German army was a beheaded giant. Their communication lines relied on the French civilian telephone network, which the resistance, the Maquis, cut with joyful frequency. Generals were shouting into dead handsets while their units were being bypassed by Patton's Third Army. There is a frantic, pathetic quality to the reports coming out of the German 7th Army headquarters during the Falaise Pocket. They aren't talking about National Socialist will or final victory. They are talking about the price of a liter of petrol. They are talking about how many men have shoes with soles made of cardboard. They are talking about the fact that the Atlantic Wall was a thin crust with no dough behind it. The grit of the collapse is found in the pocket at Falaise. Imagine a valley choked with the debris of an entire civilization. The smell was the first thing the Allied soldiers noticed, a sickening cocktail of cordite, rotting meat, and burnt rubber. The German army was squeezed into a corridor of fire where their legendary discipline finally snapped. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a liquidation. Men who had survived the horrors of the Eastern Front found themselves weeping in the dirt because they had run out of grease for their MG-42s. The engineering prowess of the Reich had produced the V-1 rocket and the Me-262 jet, but it couldn't produce enough simple jerry cans to keep the tanks moving through the grain fields of Argenton. Strategy in France became a game of pretending that the map matched the earth. Hitler, hunched over his desks in East Prussia, issued orders for counterattacks like the one at Mortain, demanding that divisions which existed only on paper strike toward the sea. He was commanding ghosts. The officers on the ground knew the truth. The front had collapsed because the industrial capacity of the United States had finally synchronized with the tactical grit of the British and Canadian infantry. The miracle of the German defense in June and July was merely a stay of execution bought with the lives of teenagers and old men. When the end came for the German presence in France, it was a frantic scramble across the Seine. The proud conquerors of 1940 were seen paddling across the river on doors, on rafts made of empty oil drums, and on the backs of those few surviving horses. They left behind the heavy steel that had defined their power. Thousands of tanks, half-tracks, and artillery pieces were simply abandoned, their crews having smashed the sights and walked away into the cooling autumn air. The collapse wasn't a single event. It was the inevitable result of a philosophy that prioritized the weapon over the system that feeds it. As the survivors limped toward the Siegfried Line, they carried with them the realization that the war of machines had been won by the side that treated their machines like tools rather than idols. The silence that fell over the French orchards wasn't just the absence of gunfire. It was the quiet of a vacuum where a world-conquering army used to be, now reduced to a few scattered shadows fleeing toward a home that no longer had a roof.